Some songs only needed one moment, one song, one chance, one shot at the world, and the world never forgot them. But the artists? The world moved on without them. These were the voices of the 1970s, songs that stopped everything when they played. Songs that crossed oceans, touched hearts, changed lives. But here is the truth most people never talk about. Some of the biggest songs of that era came from artists you may never truly know. You think you know these songs.
I always wanted to be.
But do you really know the story behind them? 10 songs, 10 moments frozen in time. Some rose fast, some fell hard. All of them left something behind that never died. This is not just a countdown. This is a journey back. Stay with us. Number 10. Nikki Thomas, Love of the Common People. All right, we're starting here, and I need you to feel this one properly. Because this song, this is not just a reggae track. This is a warm hand on your shoulder on a hard day. That's the only way I can describe it. Picture this. It's the early 1970s. You are a working class person. Maybe you grew up in a yard with not much. Maybe your parents worked long hours for small pay. Maybe life was tight and the walls were thin and some weeks the money just didn't stretch far enough. And then you hear this voice, smooth, gentle, full of something tender, singing about exactly that life. Not complaining, not bitter, just describing it. Holding it up like it means something. Like you mean something. That is what Nicky Thomas did with this song. Now, here is the context you need. Love of the Common People was not originally a reggae song. It was written by two American songwriters, John Hurley and Ronnie Wilkins, back in 1966. Several artists had already recorded versions of it. But when Nicky Thomas took it into the studio in Jamaica in 1970 and gave it that reggae heartbeat, something changed. Something clicked. He recorded it for Joe Gibbs, one of the most important producers in the history of Jamaican music. Joe Gibbs knew how to take a song and find its soul. And on this one, he found it.
She's living in the top of a common people. Smiles from the out of the family man.
The track came out on the Trojan Records label in the UK, and it did something that surprised a lot of people. It crossed over. It went into the mainstream UK pop charts. We're talking top 10. This was 1970. Reggae was still considered a niche sound by a lot of the British music establishment.
Nobody's gonna buy you a dream to cling to. Mama's gonna love you just the mother she can.
And here comes Nicky Thomas, climbing up that chart with a voice as smooth as river water. The song reached number 9 on the UK singles chart. For a reggae artist in 1970, that was huge. Now, here is your fun fact, and I love this one.
And she can.
Nicky Thomas was not a household name before this song. He was a quiet, humble singer from Jamaica who had been working his way through the music scene. This song was not supposed to be his big breakthrough moment. But sometimes music finds you before you find it. The warmth in his voice on that recording, it sounds effortless. Like he had been holding that song inside him his whole life, just waiting for the right moment to let it go.
It's a good thing you know the bus fare. You go forward through the hole in your pocket and you lose it in the...
So why did we forget him? That is the painful part of this story. After Love of the Common People, Nicky Thomas never charted again in the mainstream. He recorded more music. He kept working. But the follow-ups didn't catch the same wave. The crossover moment didn't become a crossover career. The industry moved on. Radio moved on. And Nicky Thomas quietly faded from the headlines. He passed away in 1990, and many reggae fans found out too late. Too many tributes came after the man was already gone. But here is what I want you to hold on to. That song is still there, still warm, still real, still wrapping its arms around anyone who needs it. Some songs don't need a long career behind them. They just need to be true. And that one is true. If you have ever felt like life was hard but still found something beautiful in it anyway, Nikki Thomas sang that feeling first. Stay with me, because number 9 is about to take you somewhere completely different. Number 9. Boris Gardiner, Elizabethan Reggae. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Elizabethan? What does that have to do with reggae? Just trust me on this one. Give it a moment. Because this is one of the most surprising and wonderful stories in the whole countdown. Boris Gardiner was a Jamaican musician, multi-talented, could play bass, keyboards, sing, the kind of artist who could walk into any session and make himself useful. In the late 1960s and into the 1970s, he was a fixture in the Jamaican music scene, working as a session player, a band leader, building his reputation slowly and steadily. Now here is where the story gets interesting. In 1969, going into 1970, Boris Gardiner took a classical piece. We are talking about a melody written centuries ago. A Baroque piece called Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, by Johann Sebastian Bach. And he did something completely unexpected with it. He gave it a reggae rhythm, and it worked. Somehow, impossibly, it worked. The track was released as Elizabethan Reggae in the UK on the Duke label, which was a subsidiary of Trojan Records. And the British public, who had grown up with that classical melody in churches and school halls and BBC broadcasts, they heard it dressed in reggae clothes, and something in them responded. It went to number 1 in the UK. Number 1. In 1970, let that sit with you for a second. A Jamaican musician took a Bach melody, wrapped it in reggae, and sent it straight to the top of the British charts. That is not just a music story. That is a cultural moment. Here is your fun fact. The success of Elizabethan Reggae in the UK was actually bigger than its reception back in Jamaica at the time. Sometimes that happens with music. The home crowd doesn't always see what the world sees first. It took the UK chart success for people to fully appreciate what Boris Gardiner had done. But now here is the complicated part. And this is the part that ties into our controversy thread, which we will fully unpack in just a few entries. So pay attention to this. Questions were raised at the time about the arrangement, the credits, and who exactly deserved recognition for the musical choices made on that recording. I am not going to name names right now or make accusations, but I want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we move through this countdown. Because the music industry in that era was not always clean when it came to giving credit where credit was due. Especially for black artists. Especially for reggae artists trying to break into mainstream markets. We will come back to this. Why did Boris Gardiner fade from most people's memory after that number 1? Partly because Elizabethan Reggae was so unique that it was almost impossible to follow up. What do you do after that? How do you top a novelty but also genius fusion that hit number 1? The industry didn't know how to package him after that moment. He kept making music, kept working, but the mainstream door that had cracked open slowly swung shut again. A man who took Bach to number 1 deserves more than a footnote. And now you know his name. Hold on tight, Number 8 is Pure Roots, Pure Pressure.
All right, C-Trends fam, let's keep it real. We're pouring our hearts into bringing you the best celebrity news and music deep dives. What? Check it. A massive 98% of you aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing is how you can truly support us, helping us grow and create even better content. If you're vibing with what we do, take a sec to hit that subscribe button. It's free and makes a huge difference. Plus, ring that notification bell so you never miss out. Let's flip that 98% and build this C-Trends family together. Your support is everything.
Every story you see here takes hours of digging, piecing together history, and bringing forgotten moments back to life. If you'd like to support that work, you can become a channel member. It's just the cost of a cup of coffee, but it helps us keep these stories alive, and for that, we're grateful.
Number 8. Nora Dean, Barbed Wire. Right. I need you to shift your energy for this one, because we just came from something smooth and something clever, and now we are going somewhere raw. Barbed Wire by Nora Dean is not a gentle song. It is not meant to comfort you. It is meant to wake you up. Nora Dean was a Jamaican singer in the rocksteady and early reggae era. Her voice had this quality that was hard to ignore.
I met the boy the other day.
She wasn't trying to be sweet. She wasn't trying to be pretty for the radio. She was direct, sharp. Like the title says, this track came out around 1970. Produced in Jamaica and licensed to Amalgamated Records in the UK. And when it hit the sound systems, it hit hard. The song is built around this tight, choppy rhythm with a vocal delivery that feels like someone just telling you the truth whether you're ready to hear it or not. No sugarcoating, no softness around edges.
He got barbed wire in his underpants. Oh, mama!
Now the lyrical content is rooted in everyday Jamaican life and the tension that comes with it, the challenges between men and women, the power games, the heartache, and the pride. Nora Dean put all of that into her voice and she didn't blink once.
Yeah, oh, mama! I got the breeze.
Here is your fun fact. Barbed Wire became a cult favorite on the UK reggae scene very quickly. Sound system selectors loved it because it had this energy that made a room respond. But Nora Dean herself remained largely under the radar in terms of mainstream recognition.
Licking my butt, I lick him hard up on his head. Oh, mama!
She was known in the yards, known on the sound systems, known by the people who dug deep into the music. But mainstream media never picked her up the way they picked up some of her male counterparts.
Hey, mama! Yeah!
And there it is. That's part of why she's forgotten. The reggae industry in the early 1970s, like most music industries at the time, was heavily male-dominated. Women who made powerful, assertive music were often sidelined or simply not promoted with the same energy. Labels invested more in male artists. Radio gatekeepers were mostly men making decisions about what got played and what got shelved. Nora Dean kept working. She kept recording. But the industry machinery was not built to push her forward the way her talent deserved. She sang with no fear and no apology. And the world should have listened harder. 5 minutes in. If you are enjoying this journey so far, go ahead and smash that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. Now let's keep going. Number 7. Lloyd Charmers, Rasta Never Fails.
She never feel like it. She never feel like it.
Now we go deeper, spiritually deeper. If you are a 70s reggae fan, you know that this era was not just about music. It was about movement. It was about consciousness rising. It was about people in Jamaica and across the African diaspora starting to look at the world differently, starting to ask harder questions about power and identity and freedom.
Rasta never feel like it.
And Lloyd Charmers was right in the middle of all of that. Lloyd Charmers, also known as Lloyd Tyrell, was one of the most versatile figures in Jamaican music during this period. Producer, singer, instrumentalist. He worked with artists across the whole spectrum of the reggae world. He had his hands in records that you have heard even if you don't know his name was connected to them.
For anywhere I go, I want the world.
Rasta Never Fails is a deeply spiritual piece. Heavy with conviction. Built on a foundation of roots and righteousness. The kind of song that doesn't feel like it was written in a studio. It feels like it was pulled out of something much older than any recording session. The track leans into Rastafarian philosophy. The idea that truth cannot be permanently suppressed. That Babylon, meaning corrupt systems and oppressive power structures, cannot hold down what is spiritually true forever. In the early to mid-1970s, that message was electric. Jamaica was going through serious social and political turbulence. The music was responding to real life in real time. Here is your fun fact. Lloyd Charmers had so many identities in the music industry that sometimes his own contributions got buried under the sheer volume of what he was involved in. He produced hits for other people. He wrote songs that others made famous, and his own recordings, as brilliant as some of them were, sometimes got overshadowed by the very machinery he helped build. Why is this one forgotten? Partly because it was never given major distribution outside of the reggae specialist circuit. Lived in record shops that knew what it was. It lived on sound systems that respected it, but it never got the mainstream push that would have introduced it to a wider audience. And as the decade moved on and the music shifted, deeply spiritual roots records like this one became harder to sell to an industry that was always chasing the next trend. But truth has a long memory, and this song is proof.
Number 6. Greyhound, Black and White.
The ink is black.
Okay, this one is special, and I want you to really listen to this story because it carries something important. Greyhound was a reggae group based in the UK, not Jamaica, the UK, and that matters.
The page is white, together we learn.
Because by the early 1970s, reggae was not just a Jamaican sound anymore. It had taken root in Britain, carried there by the Windrush generation and their children. It was growing in the blues dances of Brixton and Handsworth and Moss Side. It was alive in the community.
To read and write, to read and write.
Black and White came out in 1971 on Trojan Records, and it did something remarkable. It crossed over. The song is about racial harmony, unity between black and white people. It carries this message of togetherness that was, in the context of Britain in 1971, genuinely bold. Britain in the early 70s was not a comfortable place for black communities. There was real tension, real hostility. Political figures were making speeches designed to frighten people. And here comes this reggae group singing about unity, about standing together, about the common humanity underneath the skin color. It reached number 6 on the UK charts.
It's black, your child is white, no overlook.
And it got there because it connected with people across racial lines who were tired of the division. White teenagers bought that record. Black teenagers bought that record. It was one of those rare musical moments where the message actually worked the way the message was meant to work.
Up on the side,
Here is your fun fact. The lead vocalist on Black and White had a voice that radio producers genuinely loved. Smooth enough for pop radio, but rooted enough in reggae that the sound system crowd respected it. That balance is almost impossible to achieve, and Greyhound found it naturally. Why did they fade? The crossover success was real, but it was also fragile. The UK mainstream music industry of the early 70s had a very specific shelf life for reggae acts that broke through. You got one moment, maybe two. And then the A&R men moved on to the next thing, and your promotion budget dried up overnight. Greyhound couldn't replicate the chart magic of Black and White, and without that chart success, the label's support evaporated. They sang about unity at a moment when unity was dangerous to ask for. That took courage, and it deserves to be remembered. All right, we are halfway through. Number 5 is coming, and things are about to get serious.
Number 5. Lloyd Robinson, Cuss Cuss. Earlier I told you there was a controversy coming. I told you to pay attention to certain threads in this story. About credit. About the music industry. About what happens when artists don't control their own work. This is where we unpack it. Now I want to be clear before I say anything else. I am not here to accuse anyone. I am not here to defame anyone. Everything I am sharing comes from documented interviews, historical accounts, and the kind of story that people inside the reggae industry have talked about for decades. There are different versions of this story. I am going to give you the full picture and let you make up your own mind. Lloyd Robinson recorded Cuss Cuss in the early 1970s. It is a bouncy, energetic, almost humorous track on the surface. The title literally means arguing or quarreling in Jamaican patois. And the performance is lively and entertaining, but underneath the lightness of the record, there was a much darker business story. Here is the context you need. In the reggae industry of the 1970s, both in Jamaica and in the UK, artists often did not control their masters. They went into the studio, they recorded, and the producer or label walked away owning the record. The artist got a flat fee, sometimes very small, and that was the end of it. No royalties, no back end, no long-term income from their work. This was not unique to reggae. It happened across black music globally during this era. Blues artists, soul artists, reggae artists. The pattern was deeply consistent. Some people say that Lloyd Robinson, like many artists of his generation, recorded a significant amount of music and saw very little financial return from it. In interviews within the reggae community, it has been said that artists of that era were often told what they were getting and given no room to negotiate. Sign or don't record. Take the fee or step aside. There are different versions of how specifically this played out for different artists. I am not going to point at one person or one label as uniquely responsible for this, because the truth is the system itself was the problem. Multiple labels, multiple producers, multiple instances of artists being taken advantage of. What I can tell you is this. Cuss Cuss got decent play in the UK. It found its audience on the sound systems. But Lloyd Robinson never saw the kind of financial reward that the music warranted. And here is how it affected the legacy of songs like this one. When artists don't own their masters, they can't control rights. They can't license the music for films or TV. They can't benefit when the song gets sampled or covered. The music becomes an asset for someone else. And the artist, the person who actually created the thing, is left holding nothing but the memory of the session. This is why so many of these 70s one-hit wonders stayed one-hit wonders. It wasn't always about talent. It wasn't always about the quality of the music. Sometimes it was about contracts. About power. About who had the lawyer and who did in single quotes t. The music industry has changed in some ways since then. But don't ever let anyone tell you that the exploitation of black musical talent in the 20th century was a small footnote. It was systemic. And reggae, beautiful as it is, was not immune. Lloyd Robinson gave us something joyful. The industry gave him something else. That imbalances the real story behind too many songs on this list. Right. We are halfway through this countdown and I genuinely want to know which song has hit you hardest so far. Drop it in the comments right now. I read every single one.
Number 4. The Pioneers' Long Shot Kick the Bucket. Okay, I am smiling as I introduce this one, because this song has a story that is equal parts funny, heartbreaking, and purely Jamaican in the best possible way. The Pioneers were a vocal group from Kingston, Jamaica, Sidney Crooks, his brother Desmond Crooks, and Jackie Robinson. They had been recording since the mid-60s. They were seasoned. They had harmonies that felt natural and relaxed. You could hear the friendship in their voices. Long Shot Kick the Bucket was released in 1969 going into 1970. And the story behind the song is this. Long Shot was a real racehorse, a well-known horse in Jamaica. And in 1978, during a race, Long Shot collapsed and died on the track, right there in front of the crowd. In Jamaica, horse racing was not just a sport for the wealthy. Regular people bet on horses. People had favorites. Long Shot had fans. And when he died, it was a genuine community moment. People grieved. People talked about it. The Pioneers turned that moment into music. And the song that came out of it was released on Trojan Records in the UK, and it became a reggae classic almost instantly. It reached the UK top 20 for a song about a racehorse dying. That is extraordinary. Here is your fun fact. The song has this beautiful tension in it. It is upbeat, the rhythm is bouncy. You could dance to it, but the subject matter is loss. The horse is gone, and somehow those two things sit together perfectly. That ability to hold joy and sadness in the same breath is one of the things that makes Jamaican music unlike anything else in the world. Why is it underrated or under-discussed today? I think partly because it sounds like a novelty song on the surface. If you don't know the story, if you don't know that Long Shot was a real horse who died in front of real people who loved him, the song might feel like a joke, but it isn't. It is a community's response to loss, wrapped up in a rhythm that lets you process that loss without being crushed by it. That is sophisticated, that is emotionally intelligent, and it deserves more respect than the novelty track label gives it. The Pioneers turned a racehorse into music history, and they did it with joy. That is pure Jamaican genius.
Number 3. Dandy Livingstone, Suzanne Beware of the Devil. Right. Now we are getting into the real deep cuts. Dandy Livingstone, born Robert Livingstone Thompson in Kingston, Jamaica, moved to the UK as part of the West Indian community that was reshaping British culture from the ground up in the 1960s. Dandy Livingstone was one of those artists who understood both worlds. He understood the Jamaican roots of the music, and he understood the British audience he was speaking to. And that combination gave him a very specific kind of power. Suzanne Beware of the Devil came out in 1972 on Horse Records, a UK label. And it did something important. It went into the mainstream UK charts. It reached number 14. For a reggae artist on an independent label in 1972, that was real success. Now the song itself. What is it about? On the surface, it is a warning song. A man singing to a woman, telling her to be careful of someone who is not what they appear to be. The devil in the title is not literally supernatural. It is metaphorical. It is about deception. About people who present themselves one way and are something entirely different underneath. In the context of the early 70s, there is also something deeper in there about navigating a world where people of color in Britain were constantly having to read between the lines. Who was trustworthy? Who was pretending? What systems were designed to look supportive while actually holding you down? That reading might feel like I am stretching it. But listen to the song with that in mind and tell me it doesn't fit. Here is your fun fact. Dandy Livingstone was actually a significant figure in the early UK reggae and ska scene before this song made the charts. He had been building his reputation for years. He understood production, he understood melody, he understood how to make a record that worked on a sound system and also on a radio. Suzanne Beware of the Devil was in many ways the moment where all of that preparation paid off at once. Why is he forgotten? Distribution and label power again. After the chart success of this single, the follow-up campaign wasn't there. The label didn't have the infrastructure to sustain a long-term campaign for a reggae artist in the mainstream market. And so the moment came and went. Dandy Livingstone kept working in music. He didn't disappear, but the mass audience moved on, and he was never reintroduced to them the way he deserved to be. He warned Suzanne. Nobody warned him about the music industry.
Number 2. Rupie Edwards' Ire Feelings Skanga. We are so close to number 1 now, and before we get there, I need you to understand why number 2 is sitting in this spot and not at the top. Because Ire Feelings Skanga by Rupie Edwards is one of the most important reggae records of the 1970s. Full stop. Rupie Edwards was a Jamaican singer and producer. He had been in the music business since the early 1960s. He ran his own label. He understood the business side in a way that many artists of his generation simply didn't. He was not just a performer. He was a craftsman. Ire Feelings Skanga came out in 1974. And it did something that very few reggae records had done at that point. It went to number 9 on the UK mainstream pop charts. But here is what makes this record historically significant beyond the chart position. The production is extraordinary. Rupie Edwards built this track on a foundation of feelings. The word ire in Rastafarian language means good feelings, positive vibrations, spiritual wellness. And he constructed a musical world around that concept that was both deeply Jamaican and completely accessible to anyone anywhere on the planet who had ever needed to feel good when everything around them was heavy. The skank rhythm on this record is almost hypnotic. The bass sits in a pocket that makes your body respond before your brain even catches up. The vocals are warm and assured. Everything about the production feels intentional and controlled. Here is your fun fact. Rupie Edwards produced this record himself, on his own label, which means he kept the rights, which means when it charted, he actually benefited from it financially in a way that many other artists on this list were unable to do. He was one of the few artists in this era who understood enough about the business to protect himself within it. Why is he underrated today? Because even with the chart success and the ownership of his masters, Ire Feelings still got categorized by mainstream media as a one-hit wonder and filed away. The depth of Rupie Edwards as a producer and as an artist was never fully explored in mainstream conversations. He remained a footnote when he deserved to be a chapter. He owned his moment. He owned his music, and he owned his feelings. That alone makes him a legend in an era when most artists owned nothing.
All right, C-Trends fam, let's keep it real. We're pouring our hearts into bringing you the best celebrity news and music deep dives. What? Check it. A massive 98% of you aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing is how you can truly support us, helping us grow and create even better content. If you're vibing with what we do, take a sec to hit that subscribe button. It's free and makes a huge difference. Plus, ring that notification bell so you never miss out. Let's flip that 98% and build this C-Trends family together. Your support is everything.
Every story you see here takes hours of digging, piecing together history, and bringing forgotten moments back to life. If you'd like to support that work, you can become a channel member. It's just the cost of a cup of coffee, but it helps us keep these stories alive, and for that, we're grateful. Number 1. Bruce Ruffin, Mad About You.
I can feel a feeling.
And here we are. Number 1. I want to take my time with this one, because this is the one that, when I started putting this list together, kept rising to the top no matter how many times I rearranged things. There is something about this song and this story that just cuts deep.
Deep inside, hide.
Bruce Ruffin was born Bernardo Constantine Balderramos. He was Jamaican. He had been performing since he was a teenager. He had a voice that was, I am going to say it plainly, that voice was something special. It had softness and strength at the same time. It could carry a melody that a pop producer would love and still have enough grit in it that the reggae community respected it.
A funny feeling that I can't hide.
Mad About You was released in 1972 on Rhino Records, which was a UK label connected to the larger Trojan distribution network, and it entered the UK mainstream charts. It climbed, and it climbed, and it climbed. It peaked at number 9 in the UK.
I didn't know it.
Now the song itself. What are we talking about here? This is a love song, but not in the way that pop music usually does love songs. There is a vulnerability in this song that feels almost painfully honest. The narrator is not cool. He is not playing games. He is not pretending. He is a man who is completely overwhelmed by his feelings for someone, and he is just telling them. No strategy, no armor, just open.
It happened to me.
In 1972, that kind of emotional openness from a young black male artist was not common on mainstream radio. And I think that is part of why the song connected the way it did. It surprised people. It moved them.
I always wanted to be free.
Here is your fun fact. Bruce Ruffin had actually been working in music since the mid-1960s. He had been in a vocal group called The Techniques, one of Jamaica's most beloved vocal groups of the rocksteady era. So, by the time Mad About You charted in the UK, he was not a newcomer. He was a veteran who had put in years of work that the mainstream public had simply never seen.
But now I'm chained, I said, I'm mad about you.
The overnight success narrative that gets attached to one-hit wonders almost always hides a decade of work underneath it. That is true here. Why is Bruce Ruffin forgotten? This one genuinely hurts. After Mad About You, Bruce Ruffin recorded more. He tried to follow it up, but the reggae to pop crossover window that had briefly opened for him closed almost immediately.
I'm mad about you.
Mainstream radio didn't embrace the follow-ups. The label's promotional budget moved elsewhere. And Bruce Ruffin, who had given the world one of the most tender, vulnerable, emotionally honest love songs to come out of the reggae scene in the 1970s, faded from the headlines. He passed away in 2014.
I'm mad about you. I'm mad about you.
And when he passed, many of the tributes that came across social media included people saying things like, I didn't even know he was still alive, and I wish I had known more of his music. That is the pattern, isn't it?
I'm going out of my
We wait too long to say thank you. He was mad about love, and love should have been mad about him back. That it wasn't is one of the quiet tragedies of this era of music.